I think it's practically impossible to be present in the present. It's always just struck me as so mysterious. Life, it's such an extraordinary, strange sort of dream we're in. And I've always wanted to catch some of it and explore it and try to understand what it might be. I went to boarding school in the KwaZulu-Natal Midlands. The novel comes from the place and the people, as well as some of the stories that I heard while living there. Richard, Patricia, look, smart and beauty are all aspects of myself. I think the novel is saying that forgiveness is available to those who genuinely understand what harm they have done and ask for forgiveness. We can never be fully exonerated because we can't remove the harm we have caused. We have to live with the knowledge and, hopefully, try to live better in the future. The novel is about the absence of white guilt. It is not saying white people need to carry on feeling guilty. It is challenging those who think the past is someone else's business and that the needs of the present are not their responsibility. In an interview with Craig Higginson, the Place Roman, or farm novel, was one of the earliest and most recognizable genres in South African literature. Primarily an Afrikaans tradition, The Place Roman features a story set on a farm in one of the rural areas of the country, usually romanticizing the farmer's relationship to the land and idealizes farm life. Despite the challenges it might present, our novel is almost an anti-farm novel and chooses to subvert the Place Roman. His farm is not run by a paternalistic male farmer, but more of a matriarchal order, where the farmer's wife runs the farm because the farmer himself is a failure. They have no children to continue the legacy, and even the land seems hostile to their efforts to eke out a living. Dwaleni is not even a proper farm anymore, as it is in the process of being transformed into a housing development. Higginson's South Africa is not the romanticized pastoral paradise of the Place Roman. It is a place that is still trying to establish its identity, carrying the burdens of the past, and not quite able to see what the future may hold. Craig Higginson, born 1971, is a novelist, playwright and theatre director based in Johannesburg, South Africa. He has written and published several international plays and novels and won and been nominated for numerous awards in South Africa and Britain. Craig Higginson was born in Harare, Zimbabwe in 1971, formerly Salisbury, Rhodesia. Due to the escalating situation during the Rhodesian Bush War, he moved with his mother and sister to Johannesburg in 1976, the year of the Soweto uprisings. At the age of 10, he attended boarding school in KwaZulu-Natal at Clifton Nottingham Road and Michael House. The Midlands landscape would later feature strongly in his novels and plays. In 1990, in the weeks that saw the release of Nelson Mandela from prison and the unbanning of the African National Congress, Higginson went to the University of the Witwatersrand to study fine art. But he later moved to a BA Honours in English and European Literature. In 1995, he worked as the assistant to the director Barney Simon at the Market Theatre. Following Simon's death, he moved to England, where he would remain for 10 years. There he worked at the Young Vic Theatre with Tim Supple and at the Royal Shakespeare Company with Michael Attenborough. He was also a theatre critic for some years at Time Out magazine. He published his first novel, Embodied Laughter, at the age of 26 in South Africa and England, and adapted Laughter in the Dark for the Royal Shakespeare Company and BBC Radio 3 shortly afterwards. He returned to live and work in South Africa in 2004. Since then Higginson has taught at the University of the Witwatersrand and been the literary manager of the Market Theatre. He has published several novels and plays and worked in South African television as a writer. Craig currently works as the script editor on the popular South African drama series, Rhythm City. He has a MA in creative writing and lives in Johannesburg. Much of Higginson's writing explores different perspectives on the truth. His work increasingly explores character, plot and relationships to be sites for ambiguity and dialogue. He uses techniques from the theatre in his fiction such as differing perspectives and dramatic irony to represent the complexity of post-apartheid South African society, extending these themes to a global context in several instances. Higginson has been celebrated by novelists Nadine Gordimer and Andre Brink. Shortly before her death, Gordimer stated about The Dream House. The Dream House is an open and frank exploration of human life that resonates beyond race. Looksmart is a welcome new kind of character in the constantly evolving reality of African literature. Patricia Wiley is an elderly woman whose life has been defined by loss and disappointment. She has ignored unpleasant and painful truths her entire life, but will soon be confronted with the devastating consequences of her past actions. Much of the story involves Patricia, her memories, struggles, hurt, love, farm, horses, baby, husband, loss. She does not notice or remember everything, and so in many ways she is a flawed narrator, but what she does recall is vital to the way she is. She is from old South Africa, and so is not always aware of her racism and snobbery. She misses her father, a role model and beloved parent, whose memory reminds her of what her husband and former lover are not. Patricia's life has not unfolded in the way that she imagined as a young woman. The ideal of a house full of children and a happy marriage never materialized. This hope was dashed early on, when her first child was stillborn and Patricia was left barren. Patricia was then trapped in a marriage which quickly deteriorated with disappointment and unspoken resentment. She is not a particularly likable character, but the reader can sympathize with her because she is clearly in pain, both physically and emotionally. She seems to be painfully aware of how the farm is symbolic of the life she has shared with her husband, characterized by a lack of fulfillment and mutual disdain. Patricia pursued her own affair with the headmaster of the local boys' school, John Ford, for over 3 decades. She was drawn to him because he was everything Richard was not. John was educated and articulate, and he came to represent the possibility of an emotional fulfillment that she had never attained with Richard. But she is disappointed in that John cannot commit himself fully to her or love her the way she wants to be loved. Even in his death, she feels cheated in that he denied her the opportunity to care, to feel extravagantly, and this is the root of her disappointment. Richard, Patricia's husband, is a philandering and cruel man who has descended into dementia in his old age. We might feel sympathetic towards Richard at times because of his dementia, but he is, overall, a thoroughly despicable character. Even when pursuing Patricia in their youth, we have the sense that this was opportunism, rather than passion. Though he does seem to be wrestling with pain over the death of their child, he has committed many heinous crimes, and sometimes Higginson positions him as being deserving of the demons that haunt him. Beauty remembers Richard as someone who was forever looking for something to get upset about. He never looked for the reason to be happy, only the thing that could confirm the bad news. Even though he relies on Beauty as he can no longer bathe or clothe himself, he appears to retain a sense of superiority and power over her, as Beauty suggests that they both know that he is the one with the power over her. and that he will never let either of them forget it. It is his treatment of Grace which is the most damning aspect of his character. He paid Grace for sex, and when he discovered she was pregnant, he directed one of the dogs to kill her, rather than risk the exposure of his infidelity. Looksmart is a young, successful businessman with a beautiful and loving family. He is plagued by a tragedy from the past, however, and returns to his childhood home of Dwaleni to share the burden of his pain. In his smart suit and flashy tie, no one would suspect the prevailing insecurity, fear and anger lurking beneath the surface. Outwardly, he is confident, composed and the very picture of success, but beneath the surface there is much that is unresolved. Like Patricia, Looksmart's life has been defined by disappointment and a yearning to overcome a sense of numbness. The disillusionment and rejection he suffered as a young man led him to feel that something was missing in him, like an organ that could have pulled the rest of him into a more coherent whole. He has spent a large portion of his adult life searching for that missing something, first through his marriage and then in becoming a father. He seems to be deeply wounded, and he acknowledges that he has never been any good at being loved, as he is suspicious of those who claim to love him. Grace's death as well as Patricia's betrayal of him has affected him enormously. He realizes that the bigotry and racism he experiences growing up have taught him that the social divides and prejudices imposed by the apartheid system will always stand between him and Patricia. Becky is the Wileys' driver, an enigmatic and stoic servant who has his own plans for the future. In the entire novel, Becky only gives his name to 4 chapters. He is a quiet, dignified presence. He rarely speaks outside of what is practical, and possesses a heavy, slow presence about him. He too has seen much and suffered much. Beauty adores him and the way he carries his privacy. She believes that even the ancestors could choose no one better than Becky to look after the cuckoo boy with the blue eyes. He adores his son, and is utterly non-judgmental towards him. Becky's thoughts are described as slow, but he weighs them and is measured in what he does. When asked to retrieve the coffin, he does so. When asked to kill the aging dog, he does so. He does what is required. He has not told Patricia that he will not be staying with her, though. He needs time. He has heard Looksmart's offer and it is too good to refuse, especially when it comes to looking after his son. But there is evidence that he is resentful towards white people. Or perhaps only the Wileys. Looksmart, as a boy, learned to despise Becky, as he saw him as little more than a puppet in the front seat, with the madam in the back pulling the strings. But in actuality, Becky is quite relieved to be free of the Wileys. He reflects that he has come to see the madam and Beauty as 2 sides of the same thing, and he would like to kill off his feelings for both of them. He has carried the pain of them for long enough. Despite Beauty's devotion, he is quite cruel towards her, even though he has quite liked being loved by her, even though he has never given her the important parts of himself. Beauty feels betrayed when she realizes he has passed over from where she is standing to where Looksmart is standing, abandoning her for a man he barely knows. John Ford, the teacher and principal, only gives his name to 1 chapter, but he is an important person to Patricia. Becky knew that she and John were having an affair, and he was trusted to be discreet. John seems to have loved working at the school, found it difficult to tend to his dying wife, cared deeply for Patricia, and taken the time to write her a very tender letter prior to his suicide. Patricia approached him about offering Looksmart a private school education, and he arranged this. Although he knew Patricia was married, they still had an affair. Themes: racism, apartheid might be officially over as a political policy, but its legacy lingers. Where people live and work is linked to race. How much little people are educated is linked to race. Not all citizens have equal access to power, even though we live in a democracy. Richard behaves like a conquering colonist, paying for and/or taking whatever he wants. His violent response to Grace, and setting the dog on her, can be likened to white politicians during apartheid, seizing land, power, jobs, minerals, wealth, and enforcing that seizure with force. Even in his demented state, he feels he can tell Looksmart a racist joke and speak about having him whipped. Isolation, home and belonging. Patricia is largely isolated as the farm is in the countryside. She does not have contact or support from friends. Her baby has died. Her husband is suffering from senile dementia, and her former lover has committed suicide. She has the companionship of Beauty, but she is essentially a servant, employee. Towards the end of the novel, their relationship is closer, after Beauty has shared her knowledge with Patricia, and Patricia has seen the situation from another perspective. The dream house is not simply four walls and a room, it is a home that represents a space of belonging and acceptance. It is an ideal for which each of the characters yearns, in their own way, but as the word dream suggests, it is not only an ideal, but possibly an illusion as well. Patricia's dream house is her childhood home in Durban, where she plans to live out her retirement after they leave Waleni. This is the place she last remembers being truly happy, and in returning there, she hopes to rediscover that contentment and forget the pain of her past. Beauty's dream house is a space that she can call her own, and where she can be the mistress of her own life. Richard also yearns for a place of his own, where he feels welcome and in control. Looksmart's quest for a dream house is the most significant, as he seems to be a character who has never enjoyed a sense of belonging or acceptance. Dreams. The title of the novel refers to a dream house, an ideal, idyllic place. The title could be referring to the dreamy nature of one's memory of the past, or literally the dreamlike beauty of the setting of the natal Midlands farm. It could equally allude to Looksmart's dream or vision for the property or Patricia's new home in Durban, to bring him back to that half-forgotten day, which has come to resemble a dream more than an event experienced by each of them. Justice, judgment. There is a strong sense of what is right and wrong in the novel. It is wrong that Richard released the dog on Grace. It is wrong that Patricia hesitated in having Grace driven to the hospital in her car, suggesting the back key, and then finding the blanket to protect the seats. It is also wrong that Richard, aside from senility, seems to have gone unpunished. It is wrong that they both had affairs and that others suffered as a result of their behavior. It seems unfair that Noble Baki has to deal with his deaf son, but at least there is truly unconditional love present there, though not from his wife. Love and loss. It is clear that Patricia once did have a great love for life, for her father, and for Richard. While pregnant, she had an intense love for her baby. While breeding horses, she loved her work and took pride in it. But all this is lost. Lost. It isn't lost, I think about it every day. Love, hate and fear are inseparably intertwined for the major characters in the novel. As outside influences exert pressure on the bonds that exist between them, Looksmart believes he is driven to Dwaleni by the desire to confront Patricia with the truth about Grace's death. But it is Patricia's betrayal, rather than the loss of Grace, which still haunts him. Looksmart used to crave Patricia's love and approval. She was the mother figure to him, and he was always wanting to please her. In the context of apartheid, these bonds were not only taboo, but illegal. They lived in a society that didn't even allow them to touch. As a young child, Looksmart was oblivious to the prejudices which governed his country, but as he grew older, he became aware of the institutional structures that deemed him inferior because of the color of his skin. Patricia and Looksmart's relationship could be seen as a metaphor or synecdoche for South African society. Looksmart appears to reject any possibility for reconciliation or healing in their relationship. He tells Patricia, "This is a strange land we live in. After all this time, you still want to be the mother. And me, I must still be something like your child. But that relationship, it can have no place in the future of this country." He seems to be suggesting that South Africans need to find new modes of relating to one another, and that, specifically, that paternalistic nature of race relations entrenched by the apartheid regime will only reproduce prejudice and hate. Past and present. The reader knows that often actions in the past will have consequences in the present and perhaps the future. We also know that it is difficult to feel a sense of release from the grip of the past. If that past is filled with dark secrets, shame, loss, guilt, it becomes that much more difficult to move on and shrug off a sense of regret. What I find interesting is this idea you have that the past is unimportant. Truth and reconciliation. Many of the issues raised by the TRC comment on ways of dealing with suffering and the consequences of telling the truth and attempting to reconcile with past mistakes. The truth? She says this as though the truth is a concept only children believe in. Like dragons and houses made out of bread and cake. The central storyline depicts one character's determination to reveal the truth about a traumatic incident from the past. Looksmart returns to his boyhood home after more than 20 years' absence to confront Patricia. He reveals to her what he considers to be the truth about the death of Grace, the woman he once loved. As the narrative unfolds, with this trauma at its center, multiple versions of its truth are presented as each layer of fact and fiction is offered. The reader is encouraged to acknowledge that the notion of what is the truth might not be as straightforward as it seems. Looksmart comes back in his immaculate suit and rehearsed words which are designed to intimidate Patricia, but she observes the artifice of his demeanor, noticing that he is pacing about, jumpy with his nerves. It soon becomes apparent that Looksmart might not have been entirely honest with himself regarding his motivations for coming to Dwaleni. Looksmart seems to achieve his goal as he shocks her with his truth, but the relief that Looksmart should feel never materializes, and Patricia realizes that Looksmart's moment of triumph soon passes, leaving him looking smaller, closer to his true age, full of an uncertainty that she has often recognized in herself. It seems clear that Patricia represented a mother figure in Looksmart's life. He craved her attention and approval as a child. He believed that she loved him like a son. His gradual disillusionment regarding their relationship, and the broader societal environment that prohibited their familial love, appears to have been brought to a head by Grace's death. He accuses her, "You gave up. You withdrew exactly when it was your moment to step forward and do something. I thought I meant something, but I didn't." Patricia appears to habitually conceal or bury the truths that she is unable to endure. Looksmart observes that she was always so good at telling others to face up to the truth. Yet she could never see what was standing right there in front of her. Perhaps she turns a blind eye to the truth to spare herself further pain. The impact of the past on the present certainly seems to be an issue of contention between the two. Patricia wants to bury the past, to put the pain and suffering behind her, and Looksmart wants to unearth it. For him, it is not something that is lost or removed from the present. Beauty seems to have the most appreciation and understanding of the powerful nature of the truth, and the consequences of that power. She doesn't choose to dwell on it if the consequences of it cause pain. Beauty conceals the truth because she understands just how destructive it can be. Structure and narration. The title of the novel. The title represents something that is both an ideal and an illusion, a fantasy that will never become reality. Each of the characters yearns for their own version of the dream house. For Patricia, the dream house is filled with family and love that never came to fruition at Dwaleni. She resurrects that dream when her surrogate son, Looksmart, reappears in her life, and asks him to visit her at the house by the sea. She imagines that house filled with the warmth and laughter of his family, bringing with them the love she has always craved. Even as she dreams of it, it feels immediately absurd. A fantasy that will never materialize. Looksmart, meanwhile, seeks to create his dream house by remodeling the farmhouse at Dwaleni. When he was a boy, the farmhouse represented a site of privilege from which he, as the child of a black farm worker, was excluded. Though he formed a kind of mother-son bond with Patricia, the racial divides dictated by apartheid meant that they could never truly be family. As an adult, he has channeled the feelings of inadequacy, rage and hatred that stemmed from his exclusion into the farm development project. He has taken ownership of that farmhouse and all that it represents, and plans to transform it into a space that he can occupy. In doing so, he subconsciously wishes to heal the pain of his past. Patricia realizes, however, that in building houses across the farm that are modeled on the farmhouse, all he's managing to do is reproduce that pain. Beauty's dream house is simpler in conception, as it has been her dream to have a house of her own. A space is entirely her own domain for a very long time. She has been saving towards this dream and has even requested a plot on which to build it. Her dream house is a place in which she does have to serve or answer to anyone else, however. As she prepares to leave for Durbin, where will continue to serve the Wileys, there seems to be no real prospect of her dream being realized. Becky's dream house is harder to define, but it is represented by the ideal of remaining with his family and being in a position to care for them. This opportunity is offered to him by Looksmart. Richard, meanwhile, is simply searching for a home in which he feels welcomed. As his marriage to Patricia soured, he spent his entire adult life as a kind of exile on the farm, and observes it was never his house, but hers, handed down from her father. For all of the characters, the dream house is not just a physical space, but an ideal for which they yearn. A state of bliss or happiness that they feel is missing from their lives or circumstances. For all of us, the dream house is something for which every South African yearns. Higginson appears to be suggesting that many of us may not feel at home in our own country, and that the ideal of an inclusive society has not yet been achieved. Narrative structure of the novel. The novel is written in 5 parts, and each part is divided into several chapters. The novel is narrated in the third person from the perspective of its 5 central characters: Patricia, Richard, Looksmart, Beauty, and Becky. You particularly need to familiarize yourselves with these characters and their development as you read the novel. This narrative viewpoint offers insight into the internal emotions, thoughts and reactions of the individual characters. The perspectives of Patricia and Looksmart are afforded the most prominence in the novel. Both spend a lot of time reflecting on past events. Becky is provided only a handful of brief chapters, and Beauty is characterized by a simple narrative style. Richard's chapters demonstrate his confused and disorientated state of mind.